When it comes back to the example of marketing, you're definitely solving a problem of understanding people and understanding behavior in order to deliver value.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, the creative effectiveness ad tech platform. And this is a weekly podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. And every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders. I'm in Mexico City today, which is super exciting, and I've been invited here by Pablo Perez Torrescano, and I'm sat in his office. And Luis, it's great to be here. Could you give the audience a bit of background on who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you for having me. So I am a senior marketing manager that I've been working in the spirits industry for around the past 15 years. And I started my career working in various agencies, both in PR and advertising, and was fortunate enough to then make the leap and now work also to see the overall strategy of working with brands on a regional level.
So you've worked both sides of the coin, the dark and the light side. You've worked
Right.
for some pretty prestigious brands over the years and been responsible for all kinds of different work. But surely you must suffer at times from overwhelm. When things get too much, the inbox gets too full, the pressure gets too high, the intensity ramps up. What do you do when you get overwhelmed? How do you get out of that funk?
Well, it's true. You know, the day-to-day is a lot about being in this constant state of rush. So I value a lot the usual during the day to pause or to take a long walk. It also helps. But one of the things that I value a lot when I am at the end of my day that really helps me to ground me back into focus is gaming. And I know that sounds unusual, that immediately I said the word gaming and that the geek thermometer must have gone to the red, right?
But you don't have to explain yourself.
But I found that, I mean, not only beyond the enjoyment of certain games, of blowing off steam. I'm a man of the hobby and I enjoy to do that. But also I wanted to focus on games that put you in a different state of mind, more a state of mind of relaxation or contemplation. And I'll give an example. There's a very famous game that's called Myst. It's a fairly old game and was probably one of the first of its type back in the 1990s. And it's a game where you essentially have to be exploring a fictional world and deciphering your way through it. Probably the simplest way to explain this would be an escape room, perhaps. There's no real characters you interact with, but you're just exploring and solving a space. And through that, you're ultimately deciphering the story behind it. So it puts you in a state of relaxation and observation, which I enjoy a lot. And that brings me back into focus sometimes. And another example I want to share with you, it's a game called Frostpunk, which I don't know if you've heard. It's not that much of a mainstream game. It's a simulation where you're essentially in charge of the survival of a community of people who are in a post-apocalyptic ice age during the Industrial Revolution. So it's about resource management, but the most important thing the game challenges you is to make decisions that are very tough in order for the survival of the community. So you have to deal with these decisions and distance yourself from them. So you're exercising how you deal with moral burdens of whether or not you put children to work, or whether or not you amputate people's limb for the sake of their survival, but maybe at the expense of their unwillingness to do so. So at the end, it's a game that feeds back you, like how you did, like, you know, how many people you got killed on your watch. And it puts you on a distance to situations and it also in a state of mind of being, you know, more relaxed in terms of the controlled fiction to come back to your reality and be more focused on it.
I can have to be blunt here. That doesn't sound like a break from work at all, right? So it was explained to me recently that marketing is a problem and not a puzzle, right?
Right.
So if you want to sell an FMCG product, then it's a problem to solve, where there's lots of different ways you could do that. Mm-hmm. It's not a puzzle, whereas a puzzle is to solve a Rubik's Cube or something like that. And Myst sounds like a bit of a problem solving game. And what's it called?
Frostpunk.
Frostpunk, thought so.
Yes.
That sounds like resource management. Like
Definitely is.
Yeah,
yes.
Unpacking the problem of marketing an FMCG product and managing resources and keeping different people happy. I mean, I'm sure you don't amputate your agency. You may want to at times, but
hopefully not.
They actually sound quite similar to the skills you'd need to use in marketing.
Absolutely. And there's something interesting also. You can go in the game as Frostpunk as deep as to even read a short biography of each one of the individuals in your community. So you can go as close as that to understanding the people. Obviously, you have to deal with how close you want to get when you're making these hard decisions. But when it comes back to the example of marketing, you're definitely solving a problem of understanding people and understanding behavior in order to deliver value. So to practice or to exercise this in a very fictional or even fun way when it comes to games, I found it interesting as something that I can spend my free time on. So
I'm terrible at saying no to things. That's just my kind of nature. Some people would say addictive personality, but I think that just sounds a fancy way of saying you're not very good at saying no. How do you manage to stop doing it? Like, I find games very addictive, and when I start playing, I kind of get quite obsessive about them. So how do you sort of manage that so you're not playing till 3 a.m, or are you? Can you just get away with doing both?
No, it definitely depends. I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I enjoy in the entertainment of games like Fortnite that have a tremendously addictive side to it, and it's a hobby that I share actually at home with my wife, and we can be hours upon hours on the weekend, and we have even a shared community of virtual friendships that we've never met in person, but every week we gather and we exchange this experience together. But when it comes to these other types of games, it's all about being very purposeful of the activity that you're doing. As work or as any other activity, even practicing a sport or meditating, you enter an activity being very mindful of the time and the purpose you're doing it for. So that is how, to me, when it comes to a game like Myst or a game like Frostpunk, or these examples, it's about entering for a purpose of achieving a certain goal or a certain time frame that I'm going to dedicate to this. And I know that I have scheduled something afterwards.
What is your best bit of advice for someone who wants to become a better data-driven marketer?
Well, throughout my experience, what I found is that there's a very high importance of continuous learning, but also training. I mean, unlike a profession, as you were saying, it's not just a puzzle that you can formulate and solve and apply the same formula every time. Marketing is a profession where we have to be constantly training in the same way a musician does. It's not just the practice of the basic principles that we have, of strategy or management, of segmentation, the trinity of targeting and positioning. This is something that is always going to be in touch with people. And people are changing, their environment is changing, their media consumption is changing. So I believe in the power of continuously training in marketing, and I'm definitely a fan of books such as How Brands Grow, or I'm a proud alumni of the mini MBAs in marketing from Mark Ritson. I believe marketers need to continue training in marketing. I find that very valuable. But also I've found that there is a great value that comes from studying or training maybe more unusual set of skills that also feed into our profession.
So there's a lot of choice out there for learning and training. How do you make sure you're doing the right ones?
I think it's a matter of how you can ultimately bring it into practice. And sometimes it's about connecting the dots. It doesn't have to be on the nose that you're training something specific to practice it the next day. But ultimately, the skills, when you're exposed to certain challenges or to a project, and you find that this is useful, that is when you see that it was worth it. And I think that as human beings and as consumers, marketers need to be fully immersed in this world to be unlocking those types of experiences.
And what was the training you've done that you wish you'd done at the start of your career?
Well, I've found it being very valuable, a maybe an unusual skill to me. That, let me take a step back to that to the music analogy. So I was mesmerized the first time I saw musicians that were not only great at performing their craft in music, but also great at reading the other musician next to them and iterating in what they were doing, and even better at iterating in terms of what the audience was reacting to. That's called jazz. And we love that when we see it. When I saw it for the first time in theater, it was a show of improv. What they're doing, musicians and actors, they're improvising. And it struck me as something that is not a talent, that's a skill. And I believe that it's an amazing thing that we can practice as people and as a marketer to improvise better.
So this is your shiny new object, right?
Yes.
Your shiny new object that you think represents the future of data-driven marketing is improv.
Yes, as unusual as that can sound, I do believe that there's a great value in the intrinsic of improv acting. Because unlike classical theater, actors are rehearsing and preparing to execute a plan. However, improv, they're training to react to an unexpected situation. And pretty much the same way marketers do. We train. And improv gives you three very main skills. The first one, it trains you towards the skill of thriving in ambiguity. I think it can resonate with any marketer that no marketing decision has ever been made with 100% of the data. There's always in management dealing with uncertainty. And you can be lucky enough to be exposed in your work experience to situations, to projects, to deal this. But how do you train it? I found that in improv, you're constantly exposed to train how do you be comfortable with uncertainty. It ultimately takes it to the extreme of embracing it, but we're not going to go there. But at least, whereas training in marketing or in business, you're ultimately training to how you're going to deal with the data that you do have. Improv trains you in how to deal with the one you don't. And I found that to be a great way to train.
Explain that last sentence. So marketing trains you to use the data that you do have, but improv trains you to use the data that you don't have.
Exactly. What I mean is improv is built on the fact that you start with a clean slate. The same way when you approach diagnosis, you distance yourself from all the biases that you have, from all the predisposed ideas, and you face this in a completely blank slate. That's a state of mind that we're not very used to when we're dealing with data. Definitely, we bring and try to be very objective in having conversation based on data and not based on emotions or prepositions. But improv is training you constantly to be in that blank state of mind and feeding into the data. And that would be the second skill that it brings to mind. It deals with biases of data. In an improv show, you have no idea how the audience or how even your co-actors are going to react by what is brought to the table. And you're dealing always in this constant iteration of seeing how any unusual or random piece of information has to be translated into a coherent story. And the wonder of that is that when you are working in a business meeting and you have your data at hand that's going to help you to be very objective, you have to deal with the biases of the stakeholders. It takes framing of the information, or it takes translating it into insight. And this is not a skill that we're very used to be practicing. And I found that in improv, you are constantly having to do that mental translation.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So tell me how you've used the improv skill of dealing with biases within data? I know we can't talk about the day-to-day too much, but
Definitely.
could you talk about like a previous job, or like, help me understand a practical example where you get given some data and your improv brain kicks off and goes, right, okay, there's another way to look at this.
Okay. I think we've all faced with a classical example of when you run a study and you don't get the outcome that you expect or you hoped for. It's very common that we go into a study to validate something we already think and we want.
In which case it's not a study. But anyway, moving on.
Definitely. But it would be more often than you think that we try to push to get what we want to see. And it's very important how you take that as the gift to move forward maybe in another direction and fully forward. I don't mean just in the doing this concession of saying, well, okay, let's run something else or let's iterate this so this makes better sense. I'm talking about really having the courage and the mindset to take this as the gift that it is, that will move whatever campaign or product innovation into a completely uncharted territory, and it's worth it.
So I've done some improv.
Good for you.
Well, I've done not very well, but it was fun. It really is. And there's the yes and principle, right? So you're saying
exactly.
You're saying yes, and this is my iteration on it. And so what I'm hearing from you is that you're saying kind of the way to get rid of your bias is to yes and it. So you want a certain thing to come back from the research. It doesn't. So you go yes, and let's go over here.
Absolutely. Or when you start the diagnosis of a new project by seeing how your last campaign, your previous campaign went, that's exactly that moment as well. To be, yes, this happened, and now we can do this.
So we had dealing with uncertainty. We've had dealing with the biases of data. What was the third point?
So maybe linked to precisely that moment when something unexpected happens, and in improv, that is the basic nature of it. You're going to go forward, and the story is not going to unravel the way you wanted it to. But that's precisely what makes it a comedy show. The audience is laughing when they see improv because there's truth that's being revealed there on stage. Actors came in with all their biases, they left them behind, they went on this thrill ride, and at the end, out of the blue, out of thin air, came out a coherent story. So the third point and the third skill that improv has brought is that you're training to act as a person, not according to what you want to happen, but what the audience wants to see. And I found that is like the simplest way of consumer centricity in action. And we have so much talk about the need of being separated from our personal desire of what we want when we're looking at a problem to solve, of how you are not the consumer. And it's great to train that in the marketing principle that it is. But I found it as a practice of a state of mind. Improv is all about the audience, as the consumer should be when we are marketers.
I love the analogy, and it's great to talk about improv. I think the last person that talked about improv was Pete Markey, who's the CMO of Boots in the UK. I shall definitely forward this on to him. So let's take the last point, right? So do what the audience wants to see, consumer centricity. And this week I've been as I say, in around Mexico City, and I think it's so symbolic that large corporations have these large offices nowhere near the consumer. It's not like there's a corner shop downstairs where you're not looking at a family drinking their drink, or consuming their product or wearing those clothes or plugging in that device. It's quite strange that you'd have large corporates, like in London, they'd be based in Slough, or they'd be, and they actually physically remove themselves from the audience.
I see.
Do you think that's ironic?
Well, I think there's a lot of criteria when it comes to real estate for corporations, but I think it's when it comes to people that's what a marketing team or any team is formed by. I think it's very valuable that people always have in this business that proximity to the market. That was a great value that I took from being able to work in several agencies, that you really have a hands-on one-to-one relationship with the execution. There's always that gap between what the strategy is being done and how it's really performing on the ground. And people, I believe, regardless of the physical location of offices, and even more now after pandemic, after that, we've seen so normalized a much more fluid state of the physical presence of people and organizations. I think in this practice, it's always the importance of being in contact with the medium the consumer is in within your category. In my case, in alcohol, it's very important to be in touch and close to the on-trade channel, to the places where the people are actually drinking.
And it's been really refreshing to hear you talk about improvisation in the sort of the FM and in any category, or the FMCG category in particular. Yes. But I'm going to be cynical. I'm going to push back on you just for the sake of fun.
Yeah.
That in my experience of automated creative work with some of the largest FMCGs on the planet, some of the biggest brands in the world, which is great, but generally you're not seeing improvisation. You're saying, we are this brand. This is what we stand for. Certainly this is our look and feel. This is our tone of voice. And you don't see a ton of improvisation. Certainly in the FMCG category, in low interest categories, someone gracelessly described it as you grease it up and you ram it in, right? Do you know what I mean? You want to sell detergent, you just crank it out there. You get that in front of as many eyeballs as possible. So at the point of purchase, someone chooses your detergent over someone else's.
Yes.
In a mid to high level consideration categories, it's different. It's a harder sell. It's a longer sell. There's more buttons need to be pressed. But if you want someone to buy your toilet roll instead of someone else's, you know, the P&Gs of this world, for example, will just, this is us. This is our point. And we're just going to put it out there. It's not improvisation.
I think it ultimately always comes back to your goal, your strategy, and what you want to achieve. And when I talk about improvisation, and I completely relate to what you said, obviously I'm not talking about let's go and perform as actors. I'm not even a great one myself. I mean, if I may, but I'm talking about that there's this subtle mindset that it brings you, coming back to the jazz players or to the improv actors. What you're doing is you're training to iterate, to be flexible, to be adapting. And that is as natural and common as the challenges that any brand or campaign faces. We also call it a lot this entrepreneurial mindset within large organizations. That is that necessity to be flexible, to be fluid, to be reactive. And it's great when organizations can manage that. On a personal level, what I've found as a marketer is that training these set of skills helps you to navigate better this wave of constant need of adaptation.
So, not wanting to get too much into automated creative, but the spirit of improvisation is core to what we do. So
yes,
you'd have the brand platform, and there'll be some kind of shoot, some working with influencers, creators, whatever it is, and there will be some assets are produced. And then what we love to do is to automate all the different sizes and shapes and variants, but then optimize towards the best performing messaging and visuals based on what comes back from the data. And then during and at the end of the campaign, we can come back to a brand and say, look, these are the written and visual elements that drove emotion, right? This is what the audience wanted. To your point, which is like we took the core idea and we improvised it using technology to give the audience what they want to see.
Yes, and I think it's a brilliant tool because ultimately what AI is giving as a tool is aggregation and iteration of information. So maybe you can very quickly, to your example, go back to the consumer and iterate, whereas to other examples where you would take a long period of time to get a response back, if this tool allows us to do it in a matter of minutes, in a matter of days, then I think there is the value of iterating this into action. And now we're becoming more and more experts, not just on briefing, but on prompting, right, towards an AI tool to give back a very solid response.
We talked about this before. I think I have a real frustration with AI at the minute. I think that people are seeing it as something that will help them do the same thing they've always done, cheaper and quicker. right? If it was expensive, that would be kind of fine. But licenses to any of these platforms don't cost very much,
right?
So you could replace all of your like low-level copywriters with in whatever tool you wanted to. But then so can your competitors.
Absolutely.
So can the rest of the industry. So it is not a competitive advantage. It's only a disadvantage not to do it. And so our thing is like, how can you use AI to make better adverts or do things that you couldn't have ever done before? What is AI plus a human, as opposed to how do we replace that human with an AI? And we think like, don't make your creative a machine, but use the machine to make your creatives better.
I agree. I think as any exponential technology, AI is a tool that is to be harnessed to do better human work. And absolutely not the other way around. I believe that we need to be proficient enough to know how to use it, to understand it. The same way marketers, I mean, we talked about, for example, creativity or digital marketing. When before you would have specialized people just in digital marketing, and today that is just a skill that any marketer needs to know and understand. As a brand manager, I don't necessarily have to be the most creative person. I definitely need to understand creativity to be enabled to brief it well. And I think AI or any exponential technology will do the same. We need to understand it in order to harness it to our advantage, as you mentioned.
So we could sit here for another 5 hours, I think, and talk about this, but unfortunately we're at the end of the podcast. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, where would you like that to happen? What makes a message that you'll respond to?
Okay, that's an interesting one. Well, definitely, I think the most common point in my professional media is LinkedIn. So you can find me as Luis Pablo Perez Torrescano on LinkedIn. And to your point of how do I respond, I think it's all about the purpose of the contact. I value a lot, for example, students or recently graduated that reach out and they come up front saying, I'm trying to expand my network and I saw you or saw the company you work for, so I want to get in touch. I definitely go for that. But it's definitely, as any tool, also used a lot for promotion or for sales. And those are the type of messages that I avoid. I believe that any social media is a tool for sales when it's connected to an objective. But doing it systematically is something that I try to avoid, and I go for more to connecting with people than just to organizations that are randomly trying to expand their database.
Although I do think there's an irony there, isn't it? That as a brand, you will willingly put your advert in front of any number of people, invited or not. But when it happens to you, it's different, isn't it?
Well,
but no, I agree with you, man. I get pitched on LinkedIn all of the time, and I hate it. But at the same time, I run a business where we're involved in a process of serving ads to people who didn't ask to see them. So,
We're all the same.
Luis, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Very happy to be here.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That'd just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.